to 1939. While the Indian crisis was at its height in 1919 to 1922, an even more violent crisis was raging in Ireland. Throughout the 19th century, Ireland had been agitated by grievances of long standing. The three major problems were agrarian, religious, and political. The Cromwellian conquest of Ireland in the 17th century had transferred much Irish land as plunder of war to absentee English landlords. In consequence, high rents, insecure tenure, lack of improvements, and legalized economic exploitation, supported by English judges and English soldiers, gave rise to violent agrarian unrest and rural atrocities against English lives and properties. Beginning with Gladstone's Land Act of 1870, the agrarian problems were slowly alleviated, and by 1914 were well in hand. The religious problem arose from the fact that Ireland was overwhelmingly Roman Catholic and resented being ruled by persons of a different religion. Moreover, until the Irish Episcopal Church was disestablished in 1869, Irish Catholics had to support a structure of Anglican clergy and bishops, most of whom had few or no parishioners in Ireland and resided in England, supported by incomes from Ireland. Finally, the Act of Union of 1801 had made Ireland a part of the United Kingdom, with representatives in the Parliament at Westminster. By 1871, those representatives, who were opposed to union with England, formed the Irish Home Rule Party. It sought to obtain separation by obscuring the functions of Parliament and disrupting its proceedings. At times, this group exercised considerable influence in Parliament by holding a balance of power between Liberals and Conservatives. The Gladstone Liberals were willing to give Ireland home rule, with no representatives at Westminster. The Conservatives, with the support of a majority of Englishmen, were opposed to home rule. The Rhodes-Milner Group wanted self-government for the Irish in their home affairs, with Irish representatives retained at Westminster for foreign and imperial matters. The Liberal government of 1906 to 1916 tried to enact a Home Rule Bill, which continued Irish representation in the House of Commons, but was repeatedly blocked by the opposition of the House of Lords. The bill did not become law until September 1914. The chief opposition arose from the fact that Protestant Ulster, Northern Ireland, would be submerged in an overwhelmingly Catholic Ireland. The Ulster Opposition, led by Sir Edward, later Lord Carson, organized a private army, armed with guns smuggled from Germany, and prepared to seize control of Belfast at a signal from London. Carson was on his way to the telegraph station to send this signal in 1914, when he received a message from the Prime Minister that war was about to break out with Germany. Accordingly, the Ulster Revolt was cancelled, and the Home Rule Act was suspended until 6 months after the peace with Germany. As a consequence, the revolt with German arms in Ireland was made by the Irish nationalists in 1916, instead of by their Ulster opponents in 1914. This so-called Easter Revolt of 1916 was crushed and its leaders executed, but discontent continued to simmer in Ireland, with violence only slightly below the surface. In the parliamentary election of 1918, Ireland elected 6 nationalists who wanted home rule for all Ireland, 73 Sinn Féin who wanted an Irish republic free from England, and 23 Unionists who wanted to remain part of Britain. Instead of going to Westminster, the Sinn Féin organized their own parliament in Dublin. Efforts to arrest its members led to open civil war. This was a struggle of assassination, treachery, and reprisal, fought out in back alleys and on moonlit fields. 60,000 British troops could not maintain order. Thousands of lives were lost with brutal inhumanity on both sides, and property damage rose to £50 million in value. Lionel Curtis, who helped edit the Round Table in 1919 to 1921, advocated in the March 1920 issue that Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland be separated and each given home rule as autonomous parts of Great Britain. This was enacted into law 8 months later as the Government of Ireland Act of 1920, but was rejected by the Irish Republicans led by Eamon de Valera. The Civil War continued. The Round Table Group worked valiantly to stop the extremists on both sides, but with only moderate success. Amory's brother-in-law, Hammett, Lord Greenwood, was appointed Chief Secretary for Ireland, the last incumbent of this post. while Curtis was appointed advisor on Irish affairs to the Colonial Office, which was headed by Milner and Amory. The Times and the Round Table condemned British repression in Ireland, the latter saying, quote, "If British Commonwealth can only be preserved by such means, it would become a negation of the principle for which it has stood." Unquote. But British violence could not be curtailed until Irish violence could be curtailed. One of the chief leaders of the Irish Republicans was Erskine Childers, an old schoolboy friend of Curtis, who had been with him in South Africa, but nothing could be done through him, since he had become fanatically anti-British. Accordingly, Smuts was called in. He wrote a conciliatory speech for King George to deliver at the opening of the Ulster Parliament, and made a secret visit to the rebel hiding place in Ireland to try to persuade the Irish Republican leaders to be reasonable. He contrasted the insecurity of the Transvaal Republic before 1895 with its happy condition under Dominion status since 1910, saying, quote, "Make no mistake about it. You have more privilege, more power, more peace, more security in such a sisterhood of equal nations than in a small, nervous republic having all the time to rely on the good will and perhaps the assistance of foreigners. What sort of independence do you call that?" Unquote. Smuts arranged an armistice and a conference to negotiate a settlement. From this conference, at which Curtis was secretary, came the Articles of Agreement of December 1921, which gave Southern Ireland Dominion status as the Irish Free State, Northern Ireland continuing under the Act of 1920. The boundary line between the two countries was drawn by a committee of 3, of which the British member and chairman was Richard Feedham of Milner's Kindergarten and the Round Table Group, later Supreme Court judge in South Africa. De Valera's Irish Republicans refused to accept the settlement and went into insurrection, this time against the moderate Irish leaders, Arthur Griffith and Michael Collins. Collins was assassinated and Griffith died, exhausted by the strain. But the Irish people themselves were now tired of turmoil. De Valera's forces were driven underground and were defeated in the election of 1922. When De Valera's party, the Fianna Fáil, did win an election in 1932, and he became President of Ireland, he abolished the oath of loyalty to the king and the office of Governor General, ended annual payments on seized English lands, and appeals to the Privy Council, engaged in a bitter tariff war with Britain, and continued to demand the annexation of Ulster. One of the last links with Britain was ended in 1938, when the British naval bases in Ayr were turned over to the Irish, to the great benefit of German submarines in 1939 to 1945.